His company set him up in a small apartment in an old high-rise building. Floor 6, room 607. It was a strange place from the start. When Daniel first got into the elevator, he noticed something odd about the panel. The buttons went from 5 straight to 7. There was no number 6. He asked the landlord about it. The man just laughed and brushed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just a design choice." But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The building felt old, steeped in a history he couldn't quite grasp. His unease grew that first night as he walked down the long, dim hallway to his room. He noticed the lights overhead. They weren't just buzzing with age. They were flickering. It wasn't random either. Every single night, at precisely 2:14 a.m., the lights on his floor would stutter and dim, casting dancing shadows along the corridor, before returning to their steady, unsettling hum. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just faulty wiring in an old building. But deep down, he knew it was a sign, a warning he wasn't yet ready to understand. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Then, the sound started. It was a low, grating noise that seemed to come from right behind the headboard of his bed. A scraping sound, like heavy metal being dragged slowly across a concrete floor. It was faint at first, just enough to disturb his sleep. He called maintenance, convinced it was a pipe or maybe rats scurrying in the walls. A friendly handyman came, checked everything, and found nothing. No pipes, no rodents, no logical explanation for the noise. He left, shrugging, and Daniel was left alone with the silence. But the silence didn't last. That night, the scraping started again. Only this time, it was different. It seemed responsive. When he coughed, a dry, raspy cough echoed back from within the wall. He froze, listening. He whispered a quiet, hesitant hello into the room, and a moment later, a whisper returned, mimicking his exact tone, his exact timing. It was his own voice, yet it wasn't. It was a perfect, soulless copy, a mirror made of sound coming from the empty space just inches behind his head. The realization was chilling. Whatever was in the wall, it wasn't just making noise. It was listening. It was learning. Daniel's curiosity soon outweighed his fear. He had to know what was on the other side of that wall. He went down to the city records office and asked for the building's original blueprints. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, seemed reluctant. He hesitated for a long moment before disappearing into a back room and returning with a set of yellowed, brittle architectural plans. Daniel unrolled them carefully on a large table, the old paper crackling under the dim light. He ran his finger along the layout for the 6th floor. 605, 609. He traced the space between them, where his apartment, 607, should have been, but there was nothing there, just an empty, rectangular void. In small, faded letters, it was labeled, "Service Void." He stared at it, confused. He pointed to the blank space and showed it to the clerk. The man leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That section of the building," he said, looking around nervously. "It was sealed off after an incident in 1979. He wouldn't say more, but later, while digging through old newspaper archives, Daniel found a small article. The headline was simple: "Construction worker missing, 1979. The article detailed how a man had vanished while working on the 6th floor of that very building. He was never found. Armed with this terrifying new information, Daniel knew he couldn't do this alone. He hired a contractor, a practical man who dealt in facts and foundations. He explained the situation as calmly as he could. The contractor tapped the wall behind the bed. It rang hollow. "There's definitely a space back there," he confirmed. "Looks like they just plastered over an old doorway." That was all the confirmation Daniel needed. He gave the contractor the go-ahead. The drill bit into the plaster, sending up clouds of white dust that hung in the air like ghosts. After a few minutes, they broke through. The contractor pulled away a large chunk of the wall, revealing a dark, narrow opening. Inside was a small service room caked in decades of dust. A single, rickety wooden chair sat in the middle of the room, and on it a small, primitive recording device, its power cord still plugged into a decaying socket. A low, looping hiss came from its speaker. As Daniel leaned closer, he realized what he was hearing. It was the sound of breathing, slow, steady, and perfectly in sync with his own. And then, the lights went out. The entire apartment plunged into total suffocating darkness. In that sudden, deafening silence, Daniel heard it. A second set of breaths, wet, ragged, and right beside his ear. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the apartment, revealing something impossible. The wall was perfectly smooth, intact. There was no hole, no dust, no sign that a contractor had ever been there. The only evidence of the previous night's events was Daniel's own drill and tools, stacked neatly by the front door. He didn't need another sign. He packed his bags and moved out that same week, breaking his lease and never looking back. Months went by. Life returned to normal, but one day, driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't explain, he called the building's management office, pretending to be a prospective tenant. He asked about an apartment on the 6th floor. The landlord's voice on the other end of the line was friendly, cheerful, and exactly as Daniel remembered it. "Oh, we get that question sometimes," the man chuckled. "But there is no room 607. In fact, that apartment doesn't exist." The line went quiet, and as Daniel hung up, he could almost hear the faint scraping sound of metal on concrete, beginning once more for a new, unsuspecting resident. Thank you so much for watching. If this story left you with a chill, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe and always check the blueprints.